Welcome to the G.Beck program. America, tonight I ask you to watch this program with an open mind. I ask you to put your partisan differences aside and really listen, and then do this is far too important. There are things that are happening in this country that don't make sense. The question is, do we have a shadow government? And if we do, who are those intelligent minority that is guiding us through? And where are they guiding us to? But it is right out in the open. Soros spoke at Columbia University. He talked about an urgent need for campaign finance reform. I want you to remember, questioning our elections is important to George Soros. It was one of only a handful of groups who spent $123 million to push finance reform. Soros, quote, said, "Do something about the distortion of our electoral process by the excessive use of TV advertising." So he wanted to make sure that lies couldn't distort things. Well, it wasn't long after that speech at Columbia University that, lo and behold, Senator Russ Feingold, a progressive, and a few months later, John McCain, a Republican progressive, came with a proposal in hand for what would eventually become the McCain-Feingold Act. The irony, if it is that McCain-Feingold ultimately led to the explosion of 501c3 groups, which can advertise at will. Oh, 501c3 groups? You mean like Sojourners, or Color for Change, or the Tides Foundation, or Media Matters, or People for the American Way, or MoveOn.org, Center for American Progress, the Apollo Alliance, Elder Saker for Human Rights. You mean those things? You see, we had the McCain-Feingold Act, and then mysteriously, almost unbeknownst to everyone, those groups became very powerful. And guess who controls most of the most powerful? I have a commentator last night saying that we wonder if there should be a revolution. Of course, he's saying now, of course the answer is yes, and maybe even a violent revolution. It's amazing what you are missing when you don't know what you're looking for. That was on MSNBC. It's all out in the open. I believe you take a man at his word, and George Soros has publicly dedicated his life to this. He has even said he's willing to die for what he believes in. Here he is.
In the things that I am engaged in, I'm actually willing to put my life at risk, and I think it makes me feel much more complete.
Well, you complete me, George. I'm willing to put my life at stake, and so are many people in America. Soros has been calling for globalization for decades, saying, quote, "To stabilize and regulate a truly global economy, we need some global system of political decision-making. In short, we need a global society to support our global economy." Interestingly, the greatest opposition to this idea is coming from the United States. With the right sense of leadership and with a clarity of purpose, the U.S. and its allies could help stabilize the global economic system. The opportunity is waiting to be grasped. He has tens of billions of dollars all flowing in, pulling strings. His tentacles are everywhere. What is he going through all of this trouble for to achieve? Well, globalization. But we want to find out a little bit more about him and who he is and where did he come from. His childhood is shocking, traumatic. He grew up in Nazi Europe. 14 years old, he had to help the government confiscate the lands of his fellow Jewish friends and neighbors. Told his mother was a strong anti-Semite, George Soros' words, not mine. But when he had to go over and take the lands from the people, his Jewish friends and neighbors, who were being sent to the gas chambers, well, what did it do to George Soros? In an interview with Steve Kroft, Soros was asked if he felt guilt at all about taking the property from the Jews as a teenager. He responded, no. He also said, quote, "I don't deny the Jews their national existence, but I don't want to be a part of it." Last night, the phone calls came in to Fox already before the show even aired, and they were saying that, there were Soros people saying that I am an anti-Semite. because I was going to report this. And I told you that there was a structure being put into place in our country, and it was designed to bring about the fundamental transformation that has been promised. Through the course of this journey of discovery, amazingly, all the paths, time after time, really led to one man, George Soros, one guy. There's a crisis collapsing our economy. George Soros. When the administration and the progressives look for a savior to step in and save the day, George Soros. He makes predictions, and his loyal followers make sure they come true. He's pulled no punches about the end game. It's one world government. The end of America's status as the prevailing world power.
People generally play with a certain set of rules. I am particularly interested in changes in the rules of the game.
80 years ago, George Soros was born. Little did the world know then, economies would collapse. Currencies would become worthless. Elections would be stolen. Regimes would fall. And one billionaire would find himself coincidentally at the center of it all. Today, Soros is an atheist who doesn't embrace his Jewish identity and rarely supports Jewish causes or Israel.
I've not been very engaged in Israel.
Why not?
I think there are enough Jews to take care of Israel.
In 1947, the Soros family relocated from Hungary to England, where George attended the Fabian Socialist London School of Economics. He moved to New York in 1956, became a U.S. citizen in 61, and at the age of 39, he started what would become the Quantum Fund, which he would use to attack currencies all across the globe. He later would be blamed for the financial collapses in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia. And who could forget that he was the man who broke the Bank of England in 1992, shorting the British sterling by betting heavily that the currency would collapse despite government assurances to the contrary. Along with currencies, Soros also collapses regimes. With his Open Society Fund, which was founded in 1979, Soros has helped fund the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic, the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine, the Rose Revolution in Georgia. He also helped engineer coups in Slovakia, Croatia, and Yugoslavia. So what is his target now? Us. America.
Our country needs us. And we need people like George Soros, who is fearless and willing to step up when it counts.
He created his own party within a party, or his shadow party outside of the Democratic Party, the Center for American Progress. This group, from the beginning, was charged with getting control of the conservative media. Many of the people in the Obama administration were just drawn right up from there.
He spent millions in 2004 to drive President Bush out of office. He didn't succeed. But changing the attitude and policies of America, he says, remains his top priority. You wouldn't want a man like this anywhere near the President of the United States, would you? Soros has been granted at least 4 visits so far to the Obama White House. This, a man who has repeatedly called for the devaluation of the dollar.
A slow decline in the value of the dollar, a managed decline.
He's waged a war against capitalism.
Capitalism is not directly opposed to open society. Nevertheless, it poses some serious threats.
This is a man who wants the world to be one global society without borders or individual governments. One global society and one global gatekeeper.
Warning about a structure that progressives have worked to put into place. The health care bill, cap and trade, the stimulus bill. Thousands and thousands of pages that nobody has seemed to have read.
Nearly half of your financial sector donations appear to come from just 2 wealthy financiers, George Soros and Donald Sussman, for a total of about $10 million. You have said that there's no quid pro quo involved. But is that also true of the donations that wealthy Republicans give to Republican candidates, contributors including the Koch brothers.
I can't speak for the Koch brothers. You're referring to a super PAC that we don't coordinate with, that was set up to support President Obama, that has now decided they want to support me. They are the ones who should respond to any questions. Let's talk about our campaign.
Mr. Haney. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to testify here today. I'd like to start with a visual aid. This is the Homeland Security Advisory Council Countering Violent Extremism Subcommittee Interim Report for 2016. My colleague referred to it earlier as suggesting that we should refrain from using words like Ummah or Jihad or Sharia. I would like to also show you another visual aid, and this is what is called the Words Matter memo that was published in January of 2008. And my story today is going to be what happened between these two documents, these two touchstone documents, 2008 and 2016, because it was during that period of time that what we know now as the Countering Violent Extremism policy came to be. And one of the expressions of that policy is what we heard all about in the media in a few days after the Orlando shootings, that Attorney General Lynch was going to release partial transcript of Orlando 911 calls with all references to Islamic terrorism removed. That is a condensation of what was actually happening behind the scenes with subject matter experts like myself, who were sworn officers to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic. Between these two dates, 2008 and 2016, came what I call the first great purge, when I was ordered by the Department of Homeland Security headquarters to modify, a euphemism, removing all linking information out of approximately 820 text subject records in our law enforcement system that almost exclusively had to do with Muslim Brotherhood Network here in the United States. I was told to remove all unauthorized references to terrorism, that I was no longer allowed to do what are called memorandums of information received, what we call MOIRs, no more text records, no more research, and no more special treatment from the agency. But during that time, hundreds of law enforcement actions had been taken in the 3-year period when those 820 plus records were still in the law enforcement system. At exactly the same time, a controversial inaugural meeting took place on January 27th and 28th, 2010, between American Muslim leaders and the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, which was hosted by the Department of Homeland Security Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. It was controversial because several of the individuals attended the invitation-only conference in D.C. were known affiliates of at least two of the same Muslim Brotherhood front groups that had just been named as unindicted co-conspirators in the largest terrorism trial in the history of the United States, the Holy Land Foundation trial. Also that spring, at least 6 individuals with known affiliations to the Muslim Brotherhood front groups were appointed to the Countering Violent Extremism CVE Working Group, which was convened under the authority of the Homeland Security Advisory Council. I would like to show you now the logo of the Muslim Brotherhood, the moderate organization that this administration chose to ally itself with. Across the middle it says Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin, which means the brothers of the Muslim, or the Muslim Brotherhood. And at the bottom, taken from Quran 860, is the word Wa'ayuda, which means prepare yourselves to terrify your adversaries with steeds of war or weapons of war. That is the motto of the Muslim Brotherhood. By the spring of 2010, we had come to the point that a CBP officer was literally linking information, meaning the dots, on Muslim Brotherhood-linked individuals from text, while the administration was bringing the very same individuals into positions of influence to help create and implement our counterterrorism policy, both in the domestic arena and in the foreign policy arena, as evidenced in our overt support of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Libya, Algeria, and Syria. Fast forward to August 30, 2011, when the Tablighi Jamaat court case that I worked on was approved by the Chief Counsel of Department of Homeland Security. And this is an icon of the Tablighi Jamaat movement, one of the largest in the world. Outside of the United States, it's called the Army of Darkness. I began a TDY assignment, meaning temporary duty, at the National Targeting Center in November of 2011. Within 6 months, we had instituted 1,200 law enforcement actions on the case that we had started. But in September of 2012, what I call the second Great Purge, when the administration removed 67 linking records out of that case that had direct ties both to the San Bernardino Mosque, Darul Uloom al-Islamiyah San Bernardino, and the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce down in Florida. In other words, the network that we have worked on at NTC is tied directly to the terrorist attacks that we've seen recently. At the end of my career, I was relieved of my service weapon. All access to text was cut off and suspended. My secret clearance was revoked, and I was sequestered for 11 months while the results of 3 simultaneous investigations from 3 different branches of the government were concluded. In July of 31 of last year, I retired honorably. In conclusion, the threat of Islamic terrorism does not just come from a network of armed organizations such as Hamas and ISIS, who are operating over there somewhere in the Middle East. In fact, branches of the same global network have been established here in America, and they are operating in plain sight, especially among those of us who have been charged with the duty of protecting our country from threats both foreign and domestic. The goal, meaning the strategy of the global Islamic movement, is based on Quran 2:191 through 193, and is actually quite simple: to establish Sharia law everywhere in the world, including here in America. And there is an organization in the United States that's actively doing that. It's called the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America. Very benign-sounding name, but in Arabic is Majama Fuqaha al-Sharia bi-Amrikiya, the group of lawyers implementing Sharia law in the United States, which is unconstitutional. The threat that we face today, that continues growing despite the willful blindness of those who insist on pretending otherwise, are not the tactical methods of violent extremism, terrorism, or even operative verbs such as jihad, but rather the historical and universally recognized Islamic strategic goal of implementing Sharia law everywhere in the world, so that no other form of government, including the United States Constitution, is able to oppose its influence over the lives of those who must either submit to its authority, become second-class dhimmi citizens, or perish. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Haney. This committee's Oversight Subcommittee conducted a hearing on the systematic scrubbing of law enforcement and intelligence materials. Your department was invited to attend, and the Department of Homeland Security refused to attend the hearing. At that hearing, we heard testimony that described a systematic effort. If one compares, for example, the 9/11 Commission report, the word jihad appears in that report 126 times. The word Muslim appears in that report 145 times. The word Islam appears in that report 322 times. And yet, since that 9/11 Commission report, different policies have come into effect. And as a matter of systematic policy, those terms are no longer allowed to be used in this administration. The FBI counterterrorism lexicon uses the word jihad 0 times. The National Intelligence Strategy of 2009 uses the word jihad 0 times. The Strategic Implementation Plan to Prevent Violent Extremism of 2011 uses the word 0 times. The National Intelligence Strategy in 2014 uses the word 0 times. We also heard testimony from a former employee of the Department of Homeland Security, Phil Haney, that in October 2009, more than 800 Customs and Border Patrol documents were ordered modified, scrubbed, or deleted to remove references to jihad or the Muslim Brotherhood or other similar references. Was Mr. Haney's testimony that the Department of Homeland Security ordered over 800 documents in CBB altered or deleted, was that testimony accurate?
I have no idea. I don't know who Mr. Haney is. I wouldn't know him if he walked in the room.
So you have not investigated whether your department ordered documents to be modified in 2009 to remove references to jihad, radical Islamic terrorism, the Muslim Brotherhood. You have not investigated that question?
No, I have not taken the time to investigate what Mr. Haanen says, no.
And when the United States Senate Judiciary Oversight Committee conducted a hearing on that, did you or anyone in your staff inquire into those issues?
No, but you have me right here, right now, to ask questions of. So
but apparently your answer is you don't know. I am asking you, in 2009 and again in 2012, Mr. Haney testified there were 2 purges, and that was the word he used, purge, at the Department of Homeland Security to remove references to radical Islamic terrorism. Is it accurate that the records were changed?
Same answer I gave you before. I have no idea, sir.
You have no knowledge of any records being changed at the Department of Homeland Security?
Same answer. I have no idea, sir.
Would it concern you if it was accurate?
Senator, I find this whole debate to be very interesting, but I have to tell you, when I was at the Department of Defense giving the legal sign-off on a lot of drone strikes, I didn't particularly care whether the baseball card said Islamic extremist or violent extremist. I think this is very interesting, but it makes no difference to me in terms of who we need to go after. They all tell me. My
time is limited for this
question.
Hold
on just a second, please. They all tell me that ISIL has hijacked my religion, and it's critical that we bring these people to our side to do this.
You're entitled to give speeches other times. My question was if you were aware that the information has been scrubbed. I would note the title of the hearing on Tuesday was Willful Blindness, and your testimony to this full committee now is that you have no idea and apparently have no intention of finding out whether DHS materials have been scrubbed. And you suggested just a moment ago that it's essentially a semantic difference. Well, I don't believe it is a semantic difference, that when you erase references to radical jihad, it impacts the behavior of law enforcement and national security to respond to red flags and prevent terrorist attacks before they occur.
Do you believe that the President's executive orders on immigration are constitutional?
Yes, I do. Yes,
you do. You do.
I know some Muslims who think of themselves as Democrats, and they say they're against Sharia. Are they real Muslims?
Yeah, it's really funny when I hear someone saying, yeah, I was speaking to a democratic Muslim. It's the same thing as saying I was speaking to a Christian Jew or to a Jewish Muslim or something like that. It's impossible. How could you meet a Jewish Muslim or a Christian Jew? And a Muslim that says he's against Sharia, he's not a Muslim. It's impossible.
Islam is a fascist ideology, and it's not a religion like Christianity or like Judaism.
Islam is not our adversary. Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people and have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism. His latest insult is his call to stop all Muslims from entering the United States.
Hillary Clinton very much on defense about ISIS, in part because of those, large part because of the Paris terror attacks. At one point she said, I do not believe we're at war with radical Islam. She also at one point was trying to break with President Obama by saying, I do not think that ISIS can be contained.
Thousands of refugees are pouring into Europe and the United States from the Middle East, desperately trying to escape the horrors of ISIS. In many cases. But George Soros, the billionaire financial guy and friend to Hillary Clinton, says, hey, that crisis, it's the new normal. And according to a memo from his organization, quote, the refugee crisis is opening new opportunities for attracting new donors and reforming migration at the global level. What does that mean? Caitlin Collins is a reporter for the Daily Caller. She joins us from our nation's capital. Caitlin, what does that mean? What's George Soros trying to do with the immigration crisis?
Good morning. Okay, so George Soros is this foreign-born left-wing guy who essentially wants to change the nature of our country. And in this data dump, one of the memos was about the refugee crisis. And they made 3 points. They think that they've been successful at influencing immigration policy across the world. They think that the refugee crisis is an opportunity to continue doing so. And they think the refugee crisis is the new normal. And George Soros is this guy who is a staunch advocate for open borders. He wants people to be able to go wherever they want, whenever they want, for whatever reason. And for him, he sees this immigration policy, this crisis, as a vehicle to further his immigration agenda and his open borders policy. So, a man who's made billions off other people's economies failing, and he sees this crisis as an opportunity where he can benefit. And instead of seeing it from a humanitarian perspective, he sees it from a business one. He wants to manipulate the media by funding certain organizations to put his message out there, and they'll suggest stories to journalists. They wanted to pay for journalists to go train and write stories that they thought were good and productive and furthered their agenda. But then if the journalists wrote stories that were counterproductive to what they wanted to achieve, they would veto them. And I think this is a problem that Americans should be aware of, because he's so close to Hillary Clinton. You know, he had a lot of influence over her when she was Secretary of State. He's donated millions of dollars to her campaign so far this election season. And his son had dinner with Tim Kaine recently. And I think that the Democratic Party needs to answer questions about this guy who they're so embedded with.
Sure. We know that Hillary Clinton has supported the Black Lives Matter movement. Apparently, he supports some of these efforts that started with Ferguson, right, for social justice. Explain that.
Right. His Open Society Foundation has given over $500,000 to Black Lives Matter because they want to be able to support Black Lives Matters as it grows. They're worried, you know, that they won't know how to grow properly, and they want to help them dismantle structural inequality.
What does that mean?
They basically want to help Black Lives Matter further their agenda. And I think it's an issue also that the Democratic Party needs to address, because so many Democrats have openly endorsed Black Lives Matter. And now that we see that this guy who is funding Hillary Clinton is also funding Black Lives Matter, that's a problem, and that's something that Americans should be aware of.
Secretary Clinton, last week you said we've got to do everything possible to improve policing, to go right at implicit bias. Do you believe that police are implicitly biased against black people?
When it comes to policing, since it can have literally fatal consequences, I have said in my first budget we would put money into that budget to help us deal with implicit bias by retraining a lot of our police officers. They want support. They want more training. They want more assistance. And I think the federal government could be in a position where we would offer and provide that.
They show Clinton campaign researchers trying to flag Podesta about quotes that could be politically damaging. For example, one that says Clinton admits she's out of touch, referring to a speech she made at Goldman Sachs where she talked about her middle-class upbringing and went on to say, quoting, "So I lived that, and now obviously I'm kind of far removed because the life I've lived and the economic, fortunes that my husband and I now enjoy. But I haven't forgotten it." Another red flag came in 2013, a speech to the National Multi-Housing Council where she said, quoting again, "I mean, politics is like sausage being made. It is unsavory, and it always has been that way. But we usually end up where we need to be. But if everybody's watching, all of the backroom discussions and the deals, then people get a little nervous, to say the least. So you need both a public and a private position." The aides also flagged comments where Clinton is aware of the security concerns around BlackBerries, even admitting that everyone at the State Department was being hacked, even personal emails, quoting here again, "At the State Department, we were attacked every hour, more than once an hour, by incoming efforts to penetrate everything we had." The emails also entailed comments indicating she supports the Keystone Pipeline, which she publicly opposes, how she favors single-payer or government-funded health care, how she thinks Wall Street insiders are what's needed to fix Wall Street, and why she supports lowering corporate tax rates and raising the Social Security age. For the record, of the $22 million she made from speeches after resigning as Secretary of State, $3 million came from Wall Street. So far, there has been no comment from the Clinton campaign. John Podesta thinks he was hacked by Russians.
Discovery comments she made about the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. "My dream is a hemispheric common market with open trade and open borders, sometime in the future with energy that is as green and sustainable as we can get it, powering growth and opportunity for every person in the hemisphere," Clinton told a Brazilian bank in 2013. She added, "We have to resist protectionism, other kinds of barriers to market access." RNC Chairman Reince Priebus issued a statement, quote, quote, the truth that has been exposed here is that the persona Hillary Clinton has adopted for her campaign is a complete and utter fraud. How can Bernie Sanders and many like-minded Democrats continue to support her candidacy in light of these revelations?
There appears to be concern in the emails by the Clinton campaign, even before they got off the ground, about the relationship between Goldman Sachs and the Clinton Foundation. In fact, in May 2014, soon-to-be Clinton campaign manager Robbie Mook suggested that it was troubling that Goldman Sachs had been chosen to host an event for the Clinton Foundation.
Megan.
Trace, thank you. Joining us now, Chris Dyer-Walt and Howie Kurtz are back, plus David Wohl, who's an attorney and Trump supporter, and Matt Bennett, who's co-founder of Third Way and a former deputy assistant to President Clinton. Good to see you all. So, I mean, I don't know where to start. I'll start with this. My dream is a hemispheric common market with open trade and open borders, and what appears to be a reference to Bernie Sanders supporters, although all that's absolutely clear is it's people on the left, calling them bucket of losers. Bucket of losers, she refers. These are politically problematic.
Yeah, Megan, I mean, this will hit Hillary Clinton's campaign like a 9.0 earthquake when this is absorbed. I mean, this exposes her literally as a complete fraud. And I think the most critical point that was made, I think it was when a transcript, a Wall Street bank speech was released, and literally, Megan, she said, I have two different policies. I have a public policy, which I talk to people about, and then I've got a private policy, which is completely different. So what that essentially says is that when I'm campaigning, I will do whatever it takes to get elected. I'm going to tell them whatever they want to hear, whatever I think they need to hear, but the truth is going to be held secret. That is critical. That exposes her as a typical sleazy politician who will do anything to get elected. Megan, this is huge. All Kelly File viewers have to review this stuff.
The other thing she says, Howie, is I'm hoping whatever the shortfalls or glitches in the healthcare law here in America, those will be remedied, and we can keep moving forward to get affordable universal healthcare coverage like you have here in Canada. So she's pushing for Canadian healthcare, open borders, open trade, and on top of all that, she acknowledges that the State Department emails are being hacked and that they were hacking people's personal emails while she was using personal email on a personal server and acting as her Secretary of State, talking about things that could endanger sources and methods and agents out in the field.
Right. While all politicians have public and private positions, to hear Hillary Clinton, who's a big supporter of Obamacare, say she really wants to move to single payer, which is basically government-run health insurance, and what she said about bucket of losers, people on the left, do we add that to basket of deplorables for Trump supporters? That's damaging. But the most radioactive phrase in here, as you note, is open borders, because given the sensitivity of the immigration debate and Donald Trump's stand on that and the concerns about terrorism and vetting, that is a radioactive phrase.
Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. George Soros, the Democratic Party, and Hillary Clinton. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. As you may know, the 85-year-old billionaire is a far-left fanatic whose Open Society organization advocates no borders anywhere in the world. According to Soros, everyone should be able to go wherever they want for any reason and stay there. Recently, hackers believed to be backed by Russia exposed more than 2,000 documents connected to Soros and his Open Society. The information very disturbing. Soros has given about $10 million to groups opposed to the policies of Israel. He has funded individuals accusing Israel of war crimes. He has given a variety of grants to people who literally hate the Jewish state of Israel. In addition, Soros has funded investigations of individuals here in the USA who are opposed to radical Islam. People like Pamela Geller, Frank Gaffney, Liz Cheney, and Cliff May. Mr. May will be here in just a few moments. Finally, George Soros has donated about $13 million to the Democrats this election cycle. That includes $7 million to a Hillary Clinton super PAC. 12 years ago, here's what Mrs. Clinton said about George Soros.
We have been given an extraordinary blessing, and at this moment in time, our country needs us. And we need people like George Soros, who is fearless and willing to step up when it counts.
And that may present a problem for the secretary. You may remember that Donald Trump got hammered by the media for not disavowing David Duke quickly enough. Duke, of course, a far-right hater. But now we have a far-left individual, Soros, bent on harming Israel, America's strongest ally in the Middle East. So how will the media cover that? Again, Soros, one of the biggest donors to the Democratic Party. Talking Points believes the mainstream press will largely ignore the Soros story, even though it's very important. Does the Democratic Party advocate open borders worldwide, a situation that would make it easy for Islamic terrorists to kill at will anywhere? Does the Democratic Party support the enemies of Israel? Do Jewish voters even know what's happening? And presented to a largely apathetic press when it comes to reporting the truth about the upcoming election. Summing up, the Democratic Party must comment on George Soros and his activities. We've requested a statement from the DNC, and we will let you know tomorrow if they reply.
Hillary Clinton's secret Wall Street speeches prove what we have known all along, that Clinton is a self-serving Washington insider who has continued to deceive the American people for 30 years.